Welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abdallah Tuedri. I'm a member of the scientific committee here at the conference. Today we are extremely happy and pleased to have Professor Gordon Gooden from University of Deakin. He is an expert in the 21st century assessment and 21st century skills enhancement in education systems. And our workshop today will focus on how to improve assessment across the spectrum of education to account for the 21st century skills that everybody is trying to achieve to move on from education to employment for the future. With that being said, without no more delay, Professor Gordon.
Thank you, Abdallah. Let me just move this forward. Yeah. Look, thank you all very much for coming today, this morning. I should thank every one of you for being here. We planned a workshop for about 20 people. And one of my 21st century skills is counting. But I'm not going to use that now. It will worry me too much. So we've got handouts that we'll manage with for what's going to happen. In fact, the focus of this workshop is about 21st century skills at the university and college level. Now, if you haven't read the little blurb about the workshop, just keep that in mind. We'll be looking exclusively at 21st century skills as they play out in university contexts. This is also very much a workshop, and that means you're going to have to do some work. So I hope you're prepared to do some work. What I want you to do is to come to grips with a couple of frameworks for thinking about assessment tasks in your university or your college. Now, if you're not from a university or college, or there may be some difficulties in applying what we're doing. So if you have second thoughts about whether you're in the right place, don't worry if you want to just step outside and do something else for the next couple of hours. My work has been in Australia, but I've also worked in Hong Kong for several years and in the UK, and spoken in many parts of the world about assessment matters. I have a particular interest, not so much in 21st century skills, but in what it means to speak and how we use oral forms of assessment, and there is a fair bit of overlap there. So, these are the aims that I've proposed for this workshop. Looking at what's working well in your current teaching and your current assessment of your students. Looking at some of the characteristics of effective assessment tasks that we've identified in Australia, and see what thoughts these trigger and if they can be the basis of some of your own revision of your current assessment. The third point, consider what changes are needed in your institution. I'm not sure that we're going to get to that. I think we're going to be too busy just looking at our own teaching, but we'll see how we go. I've listed another point there, meeting new colleagues. How many of you are here with people you already know? No one? Almost no one? Okay. This is the first session of a 2.5-day conference. So we have another little goal here that I've snuck in, and that is to meet new colleagues. You are known to each other? You will be. You will be known to each other, and you'll have somebody to talk to over morning tea and lunch, and to talk to about 21st century skills and their assessment. Okay. So we'll be taking a fairly active approach, and we're going to start that pretty well straight away with some introductions. One of the things at the beginning of a conference, I think, or at the beginning of a class for your students, is that you turn up and you don't know anybody, and you think, well, what am I doing here? I'm all alone. So we're going to start talking to each other very briefly. introduce yourself to whoever's next to you or behind you. Somehow or other you'll have to get yourselves into groups, into pairs, to do a quick introduction. What is your experience in 21st century skills? What is your role in assessing students? And if you've got time, what's working well in your current assessments? So in a moment I'll get you to turn around or turn inside out and speak to your neighbour to introduce yourself. And then I'll just see if we can collect some ideas about where you all are at in relation to 21st century skills. I realise we haven't talked about what the 21st century skills are yet. We'll do that shortly. So I'd now invite you just to get yourself into pairs and think about those 3 questions for about 5 minutes and talk to each other, to introduce yourself to whoever you're sitting next to or in front of or behind in pairs. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, 5 minutes. That's starting now. Try and do it in pairs. If you do it in threes, it'll take twice as long. So somebody has to turn around. And I should warn you now, in the next set of activities, whole rows will have to turn around. So just talk in pairs.
Just to be sure, ya Jama'a, what we need to do is, this workshop is highly interactive, so we will need people to, in the first row, to move backwards to face the people behind them. So let me just take control of things for a minute. So if we have you guys, can you go backward? And you guys flip backward.
We've had our 5 minutes. Let's see how we've gone. I'm not going to get you all to introduce yourselves to the whole group, though I could try that. If I gave you each 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, that would be the end of this workshop. So could I just... some of you are speaking as a whole table, I think. There was a whole table over there, and this brave man has put his hand up. Could I ask you just to give us some idea of the experience of 21st century skills at your table and tell us who you are?
That was really interesting. That I'm from medical, other from business and IT and different specialty. So we come up with the generic.
Your name?
Hamza Abdul Ghani. So I'm Hamza, College of Medicine, King Saud University. I'm professor of medical education and family medicine. So we come up with some very common skills which could be applied in the university background. So communications, we said that's very important for all they have to learn about. Critical and analytic thinking, that could be another. Problem solving skills to be taught. IT or digital literacy is important. Research literacy, we a lot assess and we do that. So research, we teach undergraduate and postgraduate level also. Leadership skills to be taught and learn and assess. Collaboration, working in team and so skills. And finally we say the linguistic, because we are all non-English speaker, but we study and teach and learn in English, so they have to have the high quality linguistic skills that we have to come across within just short period of time.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much for that. We've actually just stepped ahead into just looking at what these 21st century skills are. So I guess what you've run through is a pretty comprehensive list. Could I just check, how many of you have been working with these sorts of skills in your own teaching in universities or colleges or schools? Schools? Okay. Okay, let's do another hands up. How many of you are from working at the school level, K-12? Quite a few. Just public education. Or general education, but not in a university or college. Okay, so we do have a bit of a mixture. Okay, my background in teaching has all been at university and college level, and you'll have to forgive me if you are from the school sector. When we were planning the workshop, it was clearly designed for people at the school or college level. But let me say this, I was just talking to Patrick at the back earlier, and I have often found that the sorts of skills we're talking about are relevant right across, and are often done very well in the primary school levels, less so as you get higher up in the system, until when you get to universities in Australia, it becomes more difficult.
Professor, I just want to add, as you said, that the concept is same, the principles is same.
Yes.
And especially these soft skills we're talking about, the generic skills. So should be started at the school level, not that we are responsible only at the university level. So these are things maybe at the lower level, but it should be started, communication skills, leadership skills, cooperative skills, problem solving. This all should be started at the school level, and then we are going to enhance at the university level or even the post-graduation.
Yes, good point. Thank you very much for that. We have another point. Can you speak up as loudly as possible? Oh.
دكتور صفاء الأحمد جامعة الإمام عبد الرحمن بن فيصل Vice Dean of Quality and Development. To address the activity here, our experience, our interest in the 21st century skills is to align it with the Saudi framework of a qualification, which it used to be the national framework of a qualification. It has developed to be the Saudi framework of a qualification, and it has developed, I think it used to be 5 areas, and now it's 3 areas. Knowledge and cognitive skills, and behavioral or interpersonal characteristics. It's about leadership, ethics, and all that stuff. So this framework, as universities and colleges, we have to align our learning outcomes and programs it has to be built on this framework. So here where our interest in 21st century skills come. And our university education in Saudi Arabia has become built on competencies. Instead of knowledge and content, it has moved forward for competencies, where it is a student-centered approach now.
Thank you very much. Let's move on. We've got a diverse group here, but we've quickly identified that although I'm talking about a focus on college and universities, in fact this is a movement that's working from what we would call kindergarten in Australia, preschool, right through to higher education, and possibly more firmly developed at the lower in the school sector, in fact, than in universities in Australia. We've had some focus in universities since 1992 on this, and the work is still continuing. We find it a very productive way of thinking about teaching and assessment, but it's also quite challenging and quite difficult. One of my good colleagues, Claire Hughes, I've worked very closely with Claire, and she in fact has worked with me on the framework I'm going to introduce a little bit later in this workshop. She did a survey. She's done a survey of universities, teachers in universities who are leaders in this area, and identified a number of the sorts of skills that are being used. You have a handout. I think you should all have a handout called Handout 1. And at the top of that, in that first box, some 21st century skills, another colleague, Bev Oliver, from my own university at Deakin University, has done another survey of almost every university in Australia, and looked at the sort of skills that they are looking at under this 21st century skills category, and you can see them in that first box. That's a summary of the skills that are seen as important in this area of work. I won't read through those, I'll just leave those with you. But a second way of looking at this 21st century skills and their assessment, it is the assessment of these skills that we're talking about this morning. We have had another study. when we're looking at the assessment of these tasks, I know during the workshop and during this conference you're going to be looking at this from all sorts of different perspectives and angles. And we are looking very specifically at these skills of communication, collaboration, information literacy and so on, that are often portrayed as something that sits alongside the other substantial content areas. So we've got typically lists of this sort start, as this handout says, starts with something like disciplinary knowledge. And then you have a list of written and oral communication, critical and analytical thinking, problem solving, information literacy, and so on, as if they are quite separate. The challenge for people in universities is that they are typically teaching a particular area of content, and they're expert on that. They are not expert necessarily on communication or information literacy or problem solving, because these are all almost disciplines in their own right. So we have an issue of how these become integrated. What I'd like to do next is do a genuine small group exercise which will involve looking at 3 examples of the assessment of these sorts of skills. We in Australia refer to what we call graduate learning outcomes. They are just parallel to 21st century skills. They are really the same thing. These terms have changed over time, but we talk about graduate learning outcomes as the sorts of abilities and knowledge and skills that a graduate of university course should have at the end of that course. At the school level, this would apply to what students should have the time they complete their time with you in your particular school. They are therefore really closely aligned with particular disciplines. But invariably, if you look at what sorts of abilities there should be in law or medicine or nursing or history, the lists seem to be pretty similar. One project that my colleague Claire Hughes was involved in involved doing a survey of 48 leaders of assessment in universities, in all Australian universities. And from that she identified a number of assessment tasks that seem to be working pretty well. You should have a handout that has 3 assessment tasks listed, and that handout, just let me check the number. That's called handout 3, assessment task examples. 3. But yeah, distribute that too. This is an activity that I'd like you to do in groups of 5 or 6. So you just have to, some of you will have to twist around again, but instead of being a pair, think of yourself as a whole table. So this is handout 2, handout 3, handout 3. Handout 3 has very short descriptions of 3 assessment tasks. And they are one's from business, one's from veterinary science, and one is from archaeology. The task is for each group to select one of these tasks and answer these questions. What is the overall purpose of the task? What learning is being assessed? What will students have to do to complete the task? How does the work relate to their future practice or their future working life? And what kind of role would a person be in if they were doing that sort of task in the real world? So, for each group of 5 or 6, select one of those tasks very quickly and then discuss those questions that I've put up on the board. We'll spend about 10 minutes on this. Are there any questions about the task? No, select any task. Hopefully there'll be a bit of a spread. The purpose of this activity is to help you start thinking about some key questions about assessment tasks and how they might work out in a concrete example. Okay, we have about 1 minute left. This is quite a complicated task, and no group will have finished it. I'm quite sure of that. But what I'd like you to do in the minute that you've got left in your group is I'm going to invite each group to I'll invite groups. Won't hear from all groups, but I'll invite one person from a group to speak to one of these questions. So just think about who might speak and what question you want them to be reporting back on. Okay, I think we're probably ready to hear back from you. Now there is somebody with a microphone in their hand who can move around to each group perhaps so we can make sure we can all hear you. Okay, just remember we're hoping that we don't want you to say everything that was mentioned in your group, but we'll hear one group. Okay, let's see if we'll start with the group that is putting its hand up. We've got a couple of those. Just talk to one of these points, please, and just say who you are and which point you're going to talk at, and which task you were looking at.
Well, actually, we have been searching about example 1, and regarding to the first question, the professor, I guess, was talking or was aiming to find out some skills that students had, like working in groups. And in the same time, he was looking at the ethical and inclusive engagement with the communities and other cultures. He was also looking at how students can solve problems, whether by themselves or sharing that with their colleagues.
Could I just interrupt for a second? Which task were you looking at?
We were looking in the example number 1.
Number 1, business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just please give us your name, mention which example you were looking at in your group and which question you're going to respond to. Thank you.
So again, this is Hamza, and we have chosen veterinary science. Yeah, that example 2.
Good, veterinary science.
Yeah,
Great.
and then when we started answering these questions, so we said that what is the overall purpose of the task? So as it was the problem solving, that the student was given the 6 problems which is related to the clinical practice, and then he should select, he or she should select the 4 out of that. So mainly it was assessed on that. So therefore we have to find out that what are the really problem solving skills and what are the competencies we have already decided in the curriculum. So when we went that, therefore we are going to assess those competencies. So we thought then the clinical practice, usually we should have the student have the knowledge and skills that what he has to do. So knowledge about the discipline, the veterinary, the problems, what the diseases and so on, and certain skills that what he is to do, giving injections, giving so that he has to again certain attitudes and ethical values. So based on that, he should, that third questions, that what will a student have to do to complete the task. So we are looking for applications of those competencies which has been learned during classroom, during giving the feedback, during discussion board. So what he has really achieved, those we are assessing those, because that's the which come when we used to produce a blueprint for an assessment. So we have to go for the competency which has been taught.
Okay.
So that's the applications of those we are going to, because it is a written exam, so most probably what will a student produce in response to task, usually he'll go for the reports. So he's going to write the report for these 4 problems, applying that, what type of problem was there, how he has solved. So he really showed that he has applied those competencies, what has learned related to the knowledge of that skills as well as the ethical and attitudinal things. So
Okay.
that was our.
Look, thank you very much for that. That's very comprehensive. One thing I note is that there were a number of things being assessed here, knowledge and skills and their application. Now, one of the extremely controversial points about this example is, was it a written exam? I'm not sure what it says in that example. I did a revised example because I've actually done my PhD was around how students responded to the oral examination, which was very similar to this. So I think at this point we'll hand over to.
So shall
If
I
you got
just
10 seconds?
I have a question for 2
Yes.
seconds. Yeah, because it is just problems and
Yeah.
problem solving, and we said that veterinary,
Yeah,
especially very close to the medicine. So there's a lot of skills which cannot assessed by the written exam.
Yes.
Not at all. So we do OSCE and we do certain
Yes,
practical
exactly.
exams
Yep.
and so on. So that's we want to add. When we want to really assess the skills hands-on, it has to be shown.
Yes, good point. I'm going to cut you off there so we can keep moving. It's highlighting how complex this whole business is. So let's hear from this group that was also looking at that same example of the veterinary science example. They wondered whether the examination was oral or written. So let's just hear one of the points that's come out of this group, please.
Maha Fallata, Director of Gifted Education Department in Riyadh. I think here we go with example number 2. I think the first one, what is the purpose? I think the purpose, I don't know, I get it from here, the student, that to solve the problem that they will face during their respond to 4 of the. No, I'm not talking about the purpose of this.
Yeah.
No, not power.
I think
Anyway.
you've got that very clear, I think.
Yeah,
It's
that's what
about
is the skills that we are.
the skills that the student will have, that they'll have to use when they start practicing
it's
as a
not
vet.
written and oral communication. Also, I think problem solving and learning. Learning, working, collaborating. I think, because he said, written under examination. And examination, it's written, but there is also a discussion.
Good. Look, thank you very much for that. I'm going to just ask for very short comments from the other groups as we move around, but I think that summarised it fairly well. The purpose is to test what the student is going to be able to do when they start work as a practicing vet. And when this work is done in a complex way, it can be very effective. So the point about the oral component, but there was another point raised too. In preparing for this examination, the students were collaborating in their learning. It drove them to collaborate in learning because they needed to be really sure about what they knew. Can we move on to the next group? And just remember, if you can just tell us which of the examples you were looking at and refer to one of the questions you'd like to make a comment about.
Any other groups would like to share their comments?
Right. Ali Ashamari, assistant professor at University of Tabuk. So we decided to go with the first example, the business example. Very briefly, the task is more about building knowledge or constructing knowledge. Students have to dig deeper in the literature, either individually or collaboratively, to understand one of the components in the Australian accounting system. Then they have to discuss this with the board of directors in order to get feedback from experts, subject matter experts. And then they have to explain this to non-expert shareholders. I think that's the most difficult part of it, and that's the real assessment, when you explain what you've learned to non-experts. that's pretty much what we had.
Good, thank you very much. Next contribution. There is a group on the other side, I'm sure, that is dying to speak and say something. Don't all put your hands up at once. Are you looking for the microphone? Yes.
We were talking about the first example and about students in business, and most of the time that the task or the skills that students are going to have is critical and analytical thinking, because they are going to make interviews with other, since they have the academic part and then they have to present a report about that academic part, and after that they need to compare the report with something, with a product from different country or from different company. In this case, they are going to have the skill of critical and analytical thinking, and they are going also to make their own research, interviews. In this case, they are going to have communication, interaction with other people, and they are going to apply the knowledge in the market, because since they are business students, they need to know more about the market, and they need to compare between what the market needs and the research that they are presenting, so they can make a product for that.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So what we've heard so far is a range of responses about what's being taught, how students are preparing for it, the difficulties of students producing something quite simple. The simplest formats of reporting can be quite demanding, and we've all seen how complex the business of assessing the veterinary students are. Did any group look at the archaeology example? No? Why not? Why not? The reason the archaeology is there is because it focuses on some particular skills, and it introduces very powerfully the notion of audience, the audience for the students' work. So we haven't heard from every group. Is there any group that has looked at one of these questions and would like to report back before we move on, that we haven't heard from yet? Okay, let's move on. I mentioned earlier these three examples came from a particular survey across Australian universities. And that survey identified a range of types of assessment that were being used in particular courses in universities that were trying to assess these graduate learning outcomes or 21st century skills. That is the context. People were asked, how are you assessing these 21st century skills? And these were three of the results that came out. So we had a range of assessment types, but what I want to mention now is just the characteristics that these types of assessments had in common. Whoa, that's not what we wanted. Ha ha ha. This is interesting. This isn't what something's okay. Something's slightly out of order. Anyway, here we are. Here we've got the characteristics of assessment tasks that support the assessment and development of 21st century skills. That phrase I just used, the assessment and development of skills, is really important. With all of these tasks, the tasks were designed not only to test what students knew and were able to do, but they were also designed to help them develop those abilities and skills while they were preparing for the task. Does that make sense? Hence the term assessment for learning. Do you use those terms, assessment of learning and assessment for learning here? Okay. Well, it's saying that these tasks invariably, they tend to be complex ones, and they tend to be tasks that will lead students to learn differently. We saw the veterinary science students forming little groups and discussion groups as they prepared for it. That's one example. As students were preparing their reports in the business study, they were learning a lot. They weren't just sitting down and writing what they knew, they were doing lots of research and so on. And the archaeology students, well, you didn't really seem to care about them, so I won't talk about what they were up to. Yeah, science, history. Okay. So they were tasks that promote learning. They were all of the tasks that were reported are directly relevant to the students' professional practice once they graduate. They were all preparing them for the world of work. Authenticity of role and audience. The students are being put in a role that they may well find themselves in when they have graduated. The veterinary science students will be in a position to solve problems that are presented to them as soon as they start to meet with clients. The business students, well, they may well find them, they will definitely find themselves having to communicate complex ideas to different sorts of clients, boards of directors and so on. So the roles were authentic. There's also an attempt, usually, to create some sense of audience, an authentic audience. The veterinary science example, for example, could be done with the students doing it orally with a small panel that would include a practicing vet. That vet would then be in the sort of role of a colleague, and the student would be explaining things to their colleague. The examinations I've observed, the examiners present information as if it were coming from a farmer, and the student has to respond as if they're responding to a farmer who's got a very unwell cow or pig or whatever it may be. So there's a genuine sort of audience. Careful management of group tasks. Many of the tasks from these 48 universities involve group work. I don't intend to get into that in detail here, but we found examples where the group process was highly developed and quite sophisticated. A group task has to be really well designed so that it will engage all students, and you can identify how much work and the quality of the work of the individual students. There were some very sophisticated approaches to this. Explicit task relationships. Most of the tasks that were identified by these 48 universities were all connected to other tasks. The business example, you had the students producing work at 3 different levels. Often one task would be nested into other tasks. The veterinary science task, in fact, was building on everything the students had done over a 5-year program. They were explicitly drawing on knowledge from a whole range of other tasks that they had done. And the oral version was the final oral examination they did over a progression of about 3 years. They'd be examined orally routinely. So things were building up. These tasks don't sit in isolation. The skills are complex skills that are developed over time. Reflection, turning experience into learning. There's often a requirement for students to write a small piece about their experience of the project or the work they've done. They have to reflect on it and think, well, how has this been? How have I learned from it? What have I learned? How well have I learned? So they're starting to think about themselves as learners. The business of thinking of yourself as a learner and as a learning professional is really important. If students can start to just recognise how they're learning and how they're learning well as they engage in these tasks, that's something that's very critical for when we're working professionally. When you're working as a vet, you have to be very aware of how well you're learning and how you're assessing yourself and your abilities. In any professional field, you have to keep learning. So inviting students to reflect on how they're learning as they're doing these tasks is a quite common feature. Active student role. The role of the student in assessment tasks can range from being very passive. The student can just do what they're told, study what they think the lecturer tells them to, go to the exam, answer the questions. At another extreme, the students can be involved in working out what their tasks are going to be, how they're going to learn, and how they're going to prove evidence of what they have learnt. Now, many assessment tasks that are assessing these skills occur in field placements. When a business student goes to work in a business for a short time, a nursing student goes into a hospital for a 3-month placement. Social worker spends 4 months working in a social work agency. Typically what happens in many of these sorts of placements is the students have certain learning outcomes, but they are invited to specify how they are going to meet these learning outcomes through their field placements. So they become very involved in the assessment process, and they have to make sure that they are doing the right sorts of things to learn, they are generating the evidence, and they are then presenting that evidence to the people who will be assessing them. It becomes a collaborative effort, but it is placing a lot of responsibility onto the student. These qualities, these sorts of features are all going to feed into the next framework we're going to look at in a moment. Any questions or comments?
If our organization or school university doesn't, the policy of assessment doesn't support the formative assessment, which we needed to assess these skills, what we can do.
Okay. If the institution you're working in, the school or the department or whatever, doesn't support formative assessment that focuses on students learning through the assessment task, what can you do? I think, can we come back to that later in this? Because it's actually the tail end of the workshop. If we get to that point, we may or may not, how do we change assessment in a university or a school system or a college? I would like to just keep that in mind and come back to me, please. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we've looked at things like the purpose. We've got one more question, sorry.
I see two skills which you talk a lot nowadays in the universities.
Okay, no, the list is not by priority. No, these aren't by priority at all. They're just some of the points important points that came out. Yes.
So we talk a lot nowadays about leadership and entrepreneurship skills.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Good. Good. Yes. There are skills that have been identified across all universities in Australia, and we've got standard lists of 21st century skills. And I think of leadership and creativity and social responsibility, and there are a number of them that aren't appearing here. But leadership is the really important one. With leadership being able to be exercised at all sorts of levels of an organisation. Yes. Hold on. We'll just get a question from the back before we'll come back to the middle.
I just want to go back to the assessment for learning, and how possible is it to apply assessment for learning in educational system, especially when it comes to large-scale assessment?
Okay, how does assessment for learning work in large-scale assessment? I think all of these areas of assessment and the notion of scale, there's a critical question there. How do we do things at scale around these qualities? I'm going to move us on because we could spend an hour on that. I think my only answer at the moment, and some of you will have better answers than this, I'm sure, is that it's very difficult. The attempts to do some of these things at huge scale have in a sense, haven't been successful. But some of these things do happen at scale. For example, I think there are probably a number of examples in medical education, but certainly in Australia, the occupational therapists across Australia worked on developing a common framework for assessing these kinds of abilities at the end of the student's 4-year program. So they collaborated on that and worked out ways of doing it. Now, these are not lending themselves to pen and paper tests. They are complex forms of assessment. We can probably I'll just have to stop it at that point because I really am very keen to get on to the next framework. And this exercise this morning has got limitations. I'll go ahead? Okay, we'll go ahead. Okay, so the question is, if you're teaching maybe at a school or in a university or college and you're assessing your students in particular ways, are there some useful ways of thinking about assessment tasks that can help us to redesign what we're already doing or create new tasks? Now, my good colleague Claire Hughes has turned her mind to this, and she's done a lot of work across Australia, including with the occupational therapy group, by the way, on how this can be best done. And she's drawn on a field, I have to use this term, I'll try and use it only once, systemic functional literacy. Does that mean anything to anybody? Systemic functional literacy. You don't need to know anything more about it, but it is about how we communicate with purpose around topics, with audience and so on. What's come out of that work, and it comes directly from these questions that have been quite engaging and important, these will feed directly into what I'm now going to introduce you to. If I can just check where we're at here. Let's see how we go with this. My PowerPoint slides were updated and I didn't always manage to do that as well as I should have. I'm used to running workshops where you can keep fixing things a bit late in the piece. Anyway, at the heart, what I'm going to introduce you to is an assessment design framework that I think will encompass most of the points that we've been discussing. Now, at the heart of this framework is the assessment task. It may be any of the sorts of tasks we've been talking about. The veterinary science exam, the business explanations that students are engaging in, or the archaeology project, which involves students preparing displays, or whatever you're currently doing in your own teaching. The assessment task. Think of the assessment task at the heart of this. What we need is what we don't have in university education. Some of this may sound surprising. There are lots of fundamental activities we engage in that we don't have really good frameworks for, or the frameworks are too complicated, or there are problems. So there are some basic things that we don't have enough help with. Designing assessment tasks is one of those. There are exceptions. In university faculties that have a significant education department, this can be where you find some really good frameworks. Medical education, for example, is a well-developed field, and a lot of hard work has gone into designing assessment tasks in medical education. In law, it's a bit patchier. In business, it's very patchy. So what we wanted and what Claire has tried to produce is a framework that allows us to see all these different components in a clearer and better way. And what I want to do is introduce this framework to you and invite you to see what you can do with it. It's all about not just designing assessment tasks, but designing tasks that will relate to the student's future work. The term authentic task is often applied to this. Authentic assessment is a term, but it fits right into the 21st century learning agenda and skills. So at the heart of it is a task that is providing evidence of what the students know and are able to do. And that task is going to have make you think about, well, what's the content we're dealing with here? What are the skills? What is the subject matter? And you've already identified many tasks where there are a number of skills and particular content matter. The vets, for example, need to draw on all of their knowledge about disease. And they were applying problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, communication skills. So what are the skills? What is the stuff that's being assessed? What is the mode of assessment? Are the students going to be writing? Are they going to be talking? Are they going to be creating something quite visual, a chart, a diagram, a model? We had a brilliant example from engineering, we didn't have it in the workshop today, where the students in first year work in teams to create a little model that does things, that will move a pile of stones from one point to another. They work and develop that actual working model. Or you may be designing a sort of mental model of a phenomenon. The medium is simply referring to whether it's a face-to-face medium, whether work is occurring online, so on. The product is pretty important. What are the students going to produce? Maybe a report, a plan, a performance. If you're learning to be an actor or a dancer or a singer, performance is going to be really important. But performance comes into play in many, many ways, including in medicine and in veterinary science. Being able to do something, inject an animal, for example. There are a range of performances that have to be tested. Students actually doing something in front of you, doing the work. Presentations, probably more than half of the examples that came out of this project involved students doing some sort of oral presentation. That's a whole field in its own right. So what they were producing was an oral presentation. Models we've talked about. So you're needing to think, well, what are the students going to produce? It may be what they produce is an exam paper. But if it's an exam paper, it's going to be a paper of a certain sort that will actually be somehow testing their critical thinking. And it's probably likely to be the culmination of a number of tasks they've done previously. And what is the overall purpose of the assessment task? Being very clear about this is really important. The purpose may be to test the students' knowledge as they enter the world of practice. It may be to develop their confidence in particular skills areas by getting them to do things. It may have a strong formative function. That is, it's helping students learn and get feedback and improve their own performance. So this is the heart of the framework. I might just flesh it out. No, I'll see if there's any burning question, because what I want to do next is just put an example into this. And we have a question from the very back in a very loud voice.
About the skills and subject matter, how do we disentangle those constructs out of the compound observation?
Okay. I'm just going to put a little boundary around this session because I think that actually takes us beyond into another realm. We have the product, and then how do we draw inferences from that product regarding what students actually know and what's lying behind the product? There are a number of preliminary questions. You're needing to make sure that the product is the genuine work of the student, and it is reflecting what they know rather than what they can pick up very quickly without having processed it. But how we draw influences from that, I'm just going to have to put that to one side, I'm afraid, because it takes us into a whole other area. But I will make one observation. I said that these forms of assessment are often complex. They're often not standardised. And the drawing of inferences often requires a degree of judgment on the part of assessors. Sometimes portfolios become an important part of assessing these sorts of skills, and that provides a range of evidences which increases reliability and so on. But there certainly are issues of how do you move from these products to inferring what students know. Ultimately, at the higher end of this work, you will get people from the professions and disciplines having a real important say in deciding whether the student has met the learning outcomes or not. Sorry, we'll just have to move on. Okay? Let's just apply this to a real example. And I'm going to use the example of the veterinary science final oral examination that I have observed and studied. It's a bit different to what you saw. In this case, the students go into a room, they've got two examiners in front of them, they're given 3 cases to look at, usually illustrated by a slide of a diseased animal. They have to talk through what they're seeing on the slide, what the diagnoses might be, and what they would do to help this animal and the farmer. So the task at this point is what we call a viva voce, an oral examination at the very end of a 5-year course. The last 20 minutes of a 5-year course is devoted to this viva voce. It's a very interesting thing to see. The overall purpose of the viva voce, it's to assess how well students have integrated their learning across the whole program. So how well have they integrated and applied their learning across a 5-year program. And this tests how ready they are to become vets. If they can get through this, it's seen as a very good test that they are actually ready to leave the university and start working. Product, what is coming out, the product is words. And the words are things like an oral analysis of the problems that are being presented. So you get the oral comments from the students interacting with the examiners. You get their oral diagnoses and their oral treatment options. So all you're getting out of them is words. What you're getting out of them is words. At which point I should say an enormous amount of professional practice and working life is conducted through words. And the spoken word has a particularly powerful impact on students. Students, when they have to speak what they know, will often suddenly realise, gee, I really need to know this. And they'll study differently. So the product here, the product of an oral examination is words, but they're words that have to be very well chosen and well spoken words. The subject matter that's being tested, the issues around illness in a range of animals. That's a huge thing. So you've got the students responding to a set of examples of illness. The examiners believe it is an excellent way of seeing how a student thinks. So critical thinking skills really come to the fore. And that is one of the key things they're looking at. How well are students thinking through what they're seeing? Communication almost seems to go without saying. They've got to be communicating confidently and clearly and in a professional kind of way. So if students can meet these skills, they are doing extremely well. And a student who can do this at the end of 5 years in front of two senior colleagues come out feeling very confident they are ready to work as a vet, and their examiners are very confident that they'll be able to do the job. The mode is obviously spoken. The medium is obviously face-to-face. The mode is critical because I've done a lot of work about what it means to speak. The mode makes a huge difference. And the face-to-face component makes an enormous difference. Students who have some real people in front of them will experience assessment and the learning for the assessment often quite powerfully. Finally, the role that the students are in is the role of being a practicing vet. They imagine a scenario, they have a slide in front of them, they imagine a scenario where they're going to a farm and they're going to be meeting with the vet and what are they going to be telling him or her? Are they going to be meeting with the farmer? The audience, the two examiners, are essentially putting themselves in the role of that farmer on the one hand and a colleague on the other. Talk to me as if I'm the farmer. Talk to me as a colleague. You're going back to your veterinary clinic after this meeting. Let's talk through vet to vet. The role and the audience become absolutely critical. Let's just pause here, because if you can imagine what you have here is a framework basically a framework in 6 boxes. The benefit is that it allows you to cover the most important aspects of the assessment of 21st century skills in the context of a student's work beyond the course. And if you do it, at least part of this diagrammatically, you can actually see it all on one page. Or you can see it in a diagram. Then you've got to go away and write a lot of stuff. But at least it allows you to see in one hit what you're dealing with. And just being able to see things like this, I think, can help make things clearer. And you can see some of the connections between them. Whereas if you're filling out a standard form that most universities would have, or schools would have, for setting out an assessment task, you systematically run through one point after another, which is all well and good, but hopefully this gives a different sort of perspective on this exercise. I want to turn in a moment to the business about role and how we work out what the role might be with your own students. A practicing vet or practicing professional of any kind is going to find themselves in exercising different sorts of roles beyond being a vet. You're going to be a problem solver, you'll be a supporter, a teacher, or whatever it may be within your particular profession. And we'll turn to that in a moment. But before we do, are there any questions or comments about this framework? We have a raised pencil. Just wait and we'll get the microphone to you first.
How I
I can align my KSA model in this assessment design framework? KSA, knowledge, skills, attitude. How I can say my product is my skills or knowledge or like that? Or is it not needed?
So
Is
you
it
just-
needed to align my KSA model in this design?
Your knowledge, skills, and attitudes.
Yeah.
I would think so. We're already starting to look at knowledge and skills, and you could easily pull in attitudes here. In fact, in this example, attitudes are part of what's being assessed. If a student goes into this examination very casually, looking very unprofessional, that will be noted by the examiners. It'll be powerfully noted. And any professional, when you have a student working in the field, doctor in a hospital, a school student who might do some work in an office somewhere as part of their schooling, nurses, social workers, what they end up doing is so integrated, knowledge, skills and attitudes, we tend to just separate them all out and think they're sort of separate. In fact, they're highly integrated. And many of the tasks that we're dealing with will in fact be drawing on all of those sorts of, on those three areas constantly. Any other comment before we just move ahead? Yes? Just wait a moment till we get, unless you've got a nice loud voice.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think this framework is very much similar to the activity theory, where all the elements are really interconnected and they cannot be work in isolation. Like, for example, the subject, the objective, division of labor, the context, and the role of, for example, teacher and the students. So
yes, I think that's probably very true.
Yeah.
Activity theory is probably another good way into this.
Yeah, but if I got a long time ago and then developed by Engstrom.
Yeah, Engstrom, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty much invested in the social constructivism. This is really fabulous work, but I think it's been addressed before.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
I had a good colleague who used to say, if something's worth saying, say it twice. At least twice. Maybe this is saying some things, but it's also doing it from a different, I think from a slightly different perspective, and giving particular emphasis to role and audience and communication, and the influence of the communication modes in it all. But if anybody wants to follow this up, or look at activities theory, check with your colleague here, and check with Engstrom, Scandinavian. Okay. What I want to move on to next, I think we're doing okay. Let's just keep pushing ahead, and we'll get a point where you may say, oh, stop, I've had enough. Sorry? Could you repeat that with the microphone? I can't quite hear you.
Did you give us this as a handout?
You don't have that. You don't have that as a handout. That is designed to just get you thinking, and the handout you'll end up with is going to be whatever you write on page 5 of the handouts. If you do want to get hold of any of these as a handout, give me your name and email address, and I can send you the slides. Yeah, I shouldn't. I think that's actually a very good, important handout. That's an important slide. It's possibly the second most important one that we'll be looking at. The most important one will be the version of that will be in your head about your own teaching and assessment. Okay, let's just take another step. And we're getting beeps from various directions. Okay. Excuse me for a moment while I just get these in order. The business in this framework, the business about role and audience is really a really important thing to be thinking about when you're trying to expand the kinds of assessments that you're designing and using, or if you're wanting to create something quite new. Putting the student in a particular role and working out what products come from that role is one of the harder things to do. So let's just turn our mind to the notion of role. This is an example, an example from nursing. Where a nurse in a hospital can be seen to perform a number of different roles. One of them is the day-to-day provider of nursing care and being with the patient and doing whatever is needed with that patient. Another role is a sort of scientific role where the nurse may actually be doing a little bit of research and looking into particular aspects of disease or common diseases that are coming through their ward, doing a bit of background reading onto particular problems with patients that they've got, and doing that as a sort of scientist, drawing on the study that they've done along the way. They may do some real genuine research too. A niece of mine in England was recently doing some research on the responses of newborn children to different sorts of pain relief, and the different responses that different sorts of children could have to pain, very young babies could have to pain relief. Very, very important to be capturing data. They may be they may be involved in a management role in their hospital or their clinic. So they've got a management sort of role. Teacher. Nurses are always teaching in one way or another, giving information, or I became a grandfather just about 6 weeks ago. So my daughter and her husband have been going to classes, antenatal classes before the child is born, learning about what's what. The next class they go to is a sort of first aid class for babies. Nurses will be involved in teaching. Have a heart attack, you find yourself in hospital, you're going to have nurses giving you information, advice, discussing how to manage things. Teaching role. They may be in a role of an advocate or a lobbyist, trying to get more resources for their area of the hospital. Or they may be in the role of a citizen, where they may be involved in some somewhat political business of looking at candidates for public office and thinking, well, what does this mean in terms of my role as a nurse and healthcare and public policy? So in each of these roles, there will be products and processes attached to them. Remember, we had products up here. We had tasks. Think back to your students. Product, task. Is this going to give us some insight into a range of tasks and products for our students? Is anybody involved in nursing, by the way? No, that's probably just as well. Think about this not as nursing, but think of it as nursing, but think, well, how does this translate to what's happening with my students at school, or in medicine or education or whatever it may be? Because this will give you, by definition, authentic 21st century skills type products. And so if you're looking at this role of provider of care, the student may be able to interpret a case scenario. They look at a scenario, or they may look at a real student. And the product that comes from this, you may do a case study. The product is a care management plan. Okay, so the product becomes care management plan. A possible out product for a learning assessment task in nursing. If you're looking at this scientist role, student may end up expanding some scientific knowledge through some actual research they do, or a contribution to some research that others are doing, and the end product could well become a conference presentation, could become a contribution to a journal article. At the higher end of programs, it can actually turn into a journal article. Conference papers. There is a lot of this happening now under the guise of research-based learning. If the student is in the role of a teacher, they may be involved in, you could get them to do a role play, or you could get them to actually teach something to their fellow students in a genuine way. Or the role play could involve simply explaining something quite complex to a sick person. The manager of health service, the role they would be adopting would be the role of perhaps a committee member in a hospital, and the task they are given is to produce a paper that's going to help the committee in a particular deliberation, making some recommendation about some aspect of the service. The lobbyist. The product may be a submission to a government inquiry, could be a letter to an editor in a newspaper about something that's happening in a particular region. A hospital is going to be shut down and moved somewhere. The student writes a letter about this to the local paper, not necessarily published, but that's the general idea. And in doing that, they have to go through a whole process of learning and thinking, what are the key issues here? Why vote for a particular political party in Australia? Why would you support a particular set of policies? That's a student nurse in the role of citizen. Whoop. Okay, do you get the idea? Put your students in the right role, and you can generate a task. And think about audience too while you're doing that. You've got the role, the audience, the task. Does that help? Does that? Okay. This is all designed to sort of expand our ways of thinking, and we've got a loud comment or question from the back.
Well, yeah, I have a question about the framework you designed. I like the roles. I like the idea. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I like the idea of putting students in roles, and I like the framework you shared with us. But my question is, and I get the feeling that there's something missing in here, which is domain identification. How can we assess students' domain identification? How can we know that students, when we put them in roles, they identify themselves to the roles?
Oh, okay. Yeah, can you explain the problem you may see in that? Because I'm sure there is a real problem behind that.
Yes, for example, when I say I want to put one of my students as a scientist, now how can I know that my student, she or he, sees himself or herself as a scientist when they work in a problem-based project or a problem-based activity? So I have this a constructivist teaching approach. Yes, I want to put my students in groups, and now I say, students number 1 become a scientist, student number 2 become a teacher, and so on. Now, how can I know, or how can I assess whether my student number 1, see himself or herself as a scientist when they do the activities?
Great question. Does anybody want to respond to that before I do? No, well, somebody does, but I might just keep it quiet. I don't wait for the microphone to catch up with you.
I think it depends on the context that you are providing your students with and on the process of assessing your students. The assessment will not be only in products but also in the process that the students work on. When you are asking your students for a project, you are going to assess the process of doing that project. You have like the grade will be divided for the project itself and for the process. How did you do this research? Regarding what? And then you can lead them. In this case, I think the teacher will be, it's not only being the instructor or the teacher grading the students, but also helping them, consulting them how to do something or how to make their own research.
Yes, good, because the process and all of these moderately complex tasks is really important. Thank you for that. Hold on.
So, can we assume that these are expected learning outcomes, these features or properties or attributes? Can we convert in the beginning for the course learning outcome or for program learning outcome, these 6?
Yeah, so for this to work, students need to be identifying with the learning outcomes. Is that part of what you're saying? Students need to be aware of those broad learning outcomes as important ones, and that's a process of learning in its own right, isn't it? So there's a process of development. Okay, I'm going to go fourth. You're number 3.
I think, thank you very much for that comment. What I was looking at those design or the template you are giving us, excellent idea that how we can really put the in the context, and then again I going to so again I'm just repeating what our colleague has commented, that usually our curriculum is based on the competencies. So we need to be researcher, we need to be helper, we need to be patient, we need to be a citizen, and so on. Say for example in medicine and all, I can say that whole health science, 6 or 7 categories of health science, we already identified the domain, and these are the things, these are your role already identified, and during their teaching they taught on those ways, and again we go and assess those domains. So our assessment are based on our competencies or the outcome which has been decided earlier by the curriculum development.
Okay, good.
That's the one point. The second point, I was just coming to what, again, there was a question that how in oral exam I going to include, say, KSA, and you could show some of them. So I just, because I've seen that you have putting the different tools for assessment. So always assessment based on the competencies what we are assessing, and should not, we can depend on the 1 or 2 tools. So there will be different tools for different domains. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This does come, the initial question was, what was the term you used? Domain identification. Yes. Now, in some disciplines, this is more straightforward than others. And a problem-based medical course, where the domains are specified from the very beginning, has a head start. Medicine can often be a very coherent program that's been designed in a very integrated, holistic way, can't it? So you have these ideas introduced very early on. In other disciplines, it works similarly in some places, in some disciplines, but not so well in others. And in many areas, the first year student will not identify strongly with the domain. The first year education students may well not think of themselves as a student. They think of themselves as a next high school student who's starting to do something and they're not sure what it is, or what they want to do or be. When the student starts to identify with their future work area or their profession or discipline, a sort of transformation occurs. But I think that occurs through Um, it's pointing to a problem of program design, whole program design. And when programs are broken up into smaller components, this may become less effective. Students will tend to start identifying with their future work roles when they find themselves in a role or very close to it. So an education student who knows at the end of a semester they're going to be working in a school, they're going to start thinking, oh, I'm not a student, I'm a future teacher. And these sorts of things will start to make a lot more sense. But it's a very good point. In engineering at the University of Queensland, in mechanical engineering, the very first assessment task the students get is to work in groups to develop this product I mentioned earlier, an actual machine that will move a pile of rocks from one point to another. And in doing that, they do all the sorts of things engineers have to do. And the point of that is to try and accelerate this process of their identification with engineering. And one of these is making a lot of noise. It may be that one.
So it's catching all the data transfer.
Oh, okay. Okay. So everybody else stop transferring data and listen to the data that's coming out of here. Okay. Yeah. I think my colleagues at Alverno College in the States that have been working on these 21st century skills since 1975. Yes. Do you hear that? They've been working on this since 1975 and a humorous response. These aren't necessarily 21st century skills at all. They are the sorts of skills that have been really important in all sorts of areas of work and professional practice for a long time. And the Alverno College people in Milwaukee have a whole college organised around these skills. And they've been working on it for 40 years. And they've done it really well. That's the sort of commitment that has been required. Okay. So let's just go back to your handout number 2, which is the about 3 pages of activities. Yeah. Can you just look at activity number 3? And because this business of roles is so central to what we're talking about, it's one of the most important of these elements. What I'd like you to do is spend about 5 minutes, which we may expand a tiny bit, just thinking, what are the roles? What sorts of roles would my students find themselves in? Thinking back to the nursing example, transferring that to your own students, and see how many sorts of roles you can come up with. Now, you'll be thinking, if you wish, you could do this in a group again, thinking around the group. What are the different sorts of roles, even though it's going to be across different sort of disciplines and so on? Can you come up with at least half a dozen roles within your group that the different students in your different teaching areas might be engaged in? Does that make sense? Is that clear? So you need to just get back into your group and do a little brainstorm for 5 minutes. And one of you will just need to record on your paper what you've come up with. And this time I will quickly get roles from each group. We should end up with a large bunch of roles that your graduates are going to have to fulfill. Okay, time's up. You all need to listen extremely carefully to this brilliant range of roles that have come out of this activity from all across the room. Okay. So what I want to do now is just very quickly collect roles. I don't want any explanation, just give me a role. Okay, we'll start here. One role.
Okay, the subject is physics, and the roles are researcher, teacher, scientist.
What was the first one?
Researcher,
Researcher.
teacher, scientist.
We have another. You have some more from the back? Yeah, yes, good.
Okay, he mentioned we have entrepreneur, leader, designer, yes.
Interpreter.
Leader,
designer. Excellent.
Yes,
More.
the graduate is a teacher. Our graduate is a teacher,
Yes.
school teacher. So the roles could be leader, administrator, assessor, curriculum designer, citizen.
Terrific. Listen carefully to these because they may inspire you. Hold on a moment, we've got the mic coming. Here we are.
We took the first example, the first talk about business school, and we were talking about students of business, and they can be also teachers, researchers, scientists, and also entrepreneurs, and they can be leaders or managers in their domain.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Next group. Yeah.
Well, we have talked about students of management department, and we think he can, of course, in addition to being a manager, he can be a consultant, and he can work in marketing and relations, in addition to customer service and being accountant or designer.
Terrific. Okay. Each of these roles, as I'm hearing them, I'm thinking, oh, this would lead immediately, if the student's in that role, they're going to be doing certain things and producing certain things. Okay, let's go to this front group because they are particularly keen to share some of the roles.
السلام عليكم الدكتورة وفاء التغرير من جامعة نجران. I work in the psychological departments, so we graduate student work in the counselor or community participation, researcher, teachers.
Great, thank you very much. So the psychologist is working in a range of roles too. Do you have some more? Yes, we do.
Innovator, pioneer for the starting new business. As a business school graduate, innovator or pioneer.
Great. Innovator, pioneer. Very interesting. Thank you. Some more from the back? Yes.
He can be a manager or mentoring the group, evaluator, expert.
What discipline would this be, or any? Sorry, go again.
Okay, I can say it again. A manager or mentoring the group, evaluator, expert.
Okay, good. Evaluator, expert, manager. Terrific. Do we have any we haven't heard from? I think we've probably covered the room. Did we come up with 27? Was somebody counting? Nobody was counting. Oh, we'll have to do it again. Okay, I think we got to 28. Let's say we got to 28. Can we just quickly take the next step, very quickly, and the next step would be to list. You've just done that. Just spend 5 minutes listing the sort of work or product. Just go straight to the product. If the student is in this particular role, what sort of product would come from this role? Any questions about that? So see if you can come up with a range of, again, maybe 4 or 5 from your group, of the sort of product that could come. What would the student be in this role produce? What sort of product could come from an assessment task? 5 minutes. Okay, that's a bit more than 5 minutes. We had 28 roles. Let's see if we can get at least 13 and a half examples of products or work that students would produce from across all of these roles. Is that my phone? Okay, that's just telling us our time for that activity is done. So now we need to just get the reporting back. And again, I'd like to quickly hear from each group. Tell us a couple of products, things that students could produce from those roles. And we have a volunteer from here.
As a teacher, I can come up with many products, research, different publication like books, curriculums, magazines, something related to my job, teaching aids according to my students, what they need. Yes.
Okay. Great. Piece of writing, teaching aids. Next. Do we have some products from the back where we've got a microphone handy? Yes, we do. It's coming. It's coming slowly. One or two products.
The purpose, he became more self-confidence, how to deal with the situation and the problems, more experience and knowledge, more responsible.
Oh, okay. These are things that the student will end up having developed and learnt, rather than a product that comes from the assessment task. That's okay.
Yes, it's about the assessment
Yeah,
task.
some of the outcomes of the learning. Okay. Next. Surely there's somebody really close. Yes.
Okay, so for the role researcher, the product will be a journal article, or can be conceptual framework, or just the research in general. For the role design, it can be a prototype, workable prototype. For entrepreneur, it can be initiative or company.
Good. Okay, great. Prototypes, research article. Remember, there's a whole field called what's it called? Undergraduate research. It's a whole field, and if you have a look at that, you'll find all sorts of products that students, as developing researchers, can be producing. It's a great field, including things like. No, I won't go into that. Next. You need a microphone up here. Thank you.
We went back also to business school, and we were discussing like they can have case studies, they can have also exhibitions, their own debates, they can have like a group work to have the leader in the group or managers, and also they can have their own project and they can present a plan for a product they are going to give. Also oral presentation as teachers, they are going to present anyway, so they are going to be teachers in all different sections. And also in customer service, maybe they can have like problem solving activities or oral presentation with reports and portfolios for the customers. Maybe they can collect something about customers.
You must stop there because we're getting very close to 13. We're almost over our limit. Do we have anything from the front? Yes.
Well, we have talked about the management student, and we say he can work as a consultant. The consultant can provide consultation and solutions, and he can help to underline or to draw a vision for a company. He can work as a designer who can design samples and graphics as well. Of course, when he goes to marketing, he can work on advertising and selling products. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Do we have anything from the middle of the room? Surely there's something from this group. Or have they worn themselves out? Products.
As a researcher, we have paper published. We can pattern. It also can be, as a teacher, can be produce materials. Can design the curriculums.
Design.
And maybe discover the talent student like this.
Okay, great, great. Just think again too, a number of you against that researcher role have specified a written paper, which is pretty advanced. You can think in all of these roles what might be produced at different sorts of levels. And that probably would be a range of things. And a first year student can be quite involved in a research project and produce something that's way short of a journal article. But it could be a good summary of data.
Yeah, just for research, maybe publishing paper is very advanced, as you said. But I say research assistant.
Sorry?
Research assistant, which is...
Yeah, lots of research assistant type roles, starting from the most straightforward, simple to the more complex. Yes, that's good. Look, there are some points coming from the back.
Yeah, I think the most important role for the teacher inside the class is to observe the learners, to know how to meet the different kinds of learner. For example, I have some thinker or visual or tactile, and I need to know how to meet this different kind of learner.
Okay, so a common sort of product for a student teacher can be a report on a single child.
Yeah, maybe a schedule to divide them or some information about them.
A schedule to help them. Yeah, something around a single child. Good.
Okay.
Now, who haven't we heard from? Have we heard from you? Anything to add? Okay, okay. Anybody we haven't heard from that we need to hear from? Okay. This notion of broadening sense of role and the kind of products that students can produce within that role, as I said, is really one of the more important parts of expanding our repertoire of assessment tasks that are going to be very engaging. One of the things about these kinds of tasks where students get into a particular role and are producing a genuine product is that students, certainly in Australia, find these sorts of tasks very engaging, and a lot of learning happens through them. They're often they're things that are done in groups, and the challenges of teamwork and so on come to the fore. But they are, I think, amongst the most engaging tasks that students get involved in. We've covered a fair bit of ground without any break. There is one thing that I want to leave you with, and it may take that I want to leave you with, or you can leave me with. It is another final sort of activity that will help you just consolidate the notion of this design framework that we've been looking at. And it involved just revisiting this framework and thinking individually about what could go into these different boxes if you were designing, or if you were improving and modifying an existing task you've got, or if you were starting from scratch and building a new task. So what I'd like to do, and this will mean we'll probably finish in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most, is to just spend a final bit of time revisiting this assessment design framework and thinking, how would this fit together in my own teaching? But I want to make this, if you all did this individually, I think we could be here for the rest of the day. What I'd like you to do is just think about how these parts fit together in your own framework, in your own teaching and your own students and your own school or university or college. And as a group, just make some notes in each of these boxes. It won't give you a coherent design of anything. It will give you what we would call a mishmash. Is that an Arabic term? A mishmash? Bits and pieces of thoughts. that don't all fit together, but they'll fit together in your own head. So what we've got is a large sheet, and I'll leave one of these with each group and spend a good 10 minutes discussing in your group, a bit of a brainstorm, what should be going into these boxes if you were to revise a task or redesign a brand new task using this framework. Does that make enough sense for you to proceed? So you're not, each of you thinks about your own, a course that you're teaching or might teach, and think about what might need to go into these different boxes. But instead of doing it as individuals, then pooling them all together and coming up with a set of designs, we'll just come up with ideas from each of you in relation to each of these elements. So we'll just pass these around to each group. Each group will just have one of these. Talk amongst yourselves about what this means for you now and the sorts of things, ideas and words that you would put into these boxes if you were redesigning another an assessment task. So we'll spend probably this will take a good 10 minutes just to collect whatever thoughts you can get across all of these boxes. Think about different tasks that members of the group might want to design and the modes and mediums, etc., and just put some words down against them. Okay, I think it's time to call a halt to this activity. If I could have your attention, please. Now, some of you have been very diligent and have done exactly what you were going to do with the task. Some of you have been discussing other related matters. Some of you have got involved in various discussions around different aspects of education and what is higher education and and what are we here for. I know groups have attacked this in different ways. The purpose for doing this activity is just to get you refocused on this framework and just to reinforce its possible usefulness once you've left here. I'm just going to ask one group to give us a report on what they've come up with. And this group over here is just going to give us a quick outline of what came from them. Okay. But just before you start talking, do you have a question or something to add? Okay. Well, just a very quick feedback on what you came up with.
Again, we focused on the business school, and one of the work that students can provide is a project about a product they need to make an advertisement or to advertise for this product. And the overall purpose of the learning goal will be to assess students' knowledge about market needs, the needs, and the integrated knowledge or the knowledge they get from different courses in their major. And the subject matter will be, or the topics, it will be regarding critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and they are going to work independently and collaboratively with their friends in groups. And the mode will be like their presentation or their project could be presented orally, or it could be in a brochure or in PowerPoint presentation, a poster, or the product itself. And the type of work they are going to do to have this product or project, they can make interviews, case studies, surveys, to get analysis about the product and the market needs. And their roles, they will be interpreters about their product, and the audience should be clients and customers.
Thank you very much. I think this is a good illustration of just how you can use this framework to think through these various elements of the assessment task design, and that's what I was hoping would come out of this particular activity. Before we do one final very short 1 minute activity, are there any questions? We'll wrap up within the next few minutes, but are there any questions or comments that anyone wants to offer before we do finish? Sorry? Can I pretend that I've forgotten? You repeat the question, please. Repeat the question because somebody else may have forgotten. So,
if our institute doesn't have policy assessment for formative assessment in order to assess these skills, what we can do as a teachers, as a professor?
Okay. If your institution doesn't have formative assessment to teach these skills, what can you do? If every piece of assessment is a summative piece or it's by prescribed methods, such as examinations. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I think... yeah. Then, yes.
And then I want you to...
Okay. Okay, fine. A response from the local context, and then I'll give a brief response. And you have something to add at the back?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Really, it's two questions. It was coming in mind, and I said that at the end I will. So he raised again. So his questions that when there is a institutions does not allow us for the assessment for learning, which is the now global trend. One, I'm an assessment man. My master degree is in assessment. So that's the global trend. One. The second question was there from back, that assessment for learning skills. How I can do it? Assessment for learning skills. So I'm going to respond. In university, all university in the kingdom, there is a what they call that you have to do continuous assessment and you have to do the final assessment. Final, nothing but the summative. And continuous should be assessment for learning, should be. And usually they say it is a regulation for the university as a whole, all kingdom university, that you should have the continuous assessment for 60% marks. Now the question is come that how you can do the formative assessment and with the marks. It should be just for the teaching and learning. So I'll go back again and then I'll come. So for the people who are talking about how I can do the assessment for learning for skills. So watch the skills, skills. You have the numbers of skills. For medicine, we have 120 skills to be learned. And each skills has been divided into the over the 5 years. And so we take a number of 20 skills, 30 skills, and so on. And these skills usually watched by the tutors and given feedback till he come to the proficiency. So that's the teaching. So same way that we can include into the continuous assessment. The problem is only that if our student not given the marks for the continuous assessment, they will not come for the assessment. We say that this is the assessment for your learning. And if there is nothing there, so we have to add to that some of the marks, even small marks, to complete that. That's our local context. I hope that answered the both questions.
Okay. I just have to be extremely brief in what I say. This whole business of assessing these skills has often been defined. Late colleague of mine, Peter Knight, called these wicked competencies, meaning that they are very difficult things to deal with. They're things that are difficult to teach. They are difficult to conceptualize, and they are often very, very hard to assess. There's assessment that happens at all sorts of different levels. In many cases, a lot of informal assessment is happening all the time in a classroom, and that there are usually no regulations against that happening. It's not unusual to have limits on the numbers of pieces of assessment that can occur along the way. If you are limited to a single examination at the end, if all the weight is put on an exam, I think all I can suggest is that the exam needs to be designed so that the only way students can succeed is to work consistently around different themes and different tasks that you are proposing that they work on in class. You don't call them assessment, you're just going to say, if you want to do any good in this exam, these are the kinds of questions, and the only way to prepare for them is to engage in some of these activities within the classroom. But that's a huge question. It's a huge question. Look, we do need to stop at this point. There is one final activity that will just be a purely mental activity. In your heads, just focus on this activity for 1 minute, and then I will dismiss the class. Okay? Just think to yourself and tell yourself, what is one thing I might do as a result of this workshop when I leave here? What is one thing I might actually do and take away and do something about as I leave? Don't need to tell anyone. Just think about that for a moment. What could I do as a result of what I've experienced this morning? Okay. Well, that quietened you all. So as you leave here and go and think about doing something, I wish you good luck and thank you for engaging in all these activities and discussions so willingly and being such an interesting group of people. So thank you. I think we're done.